about psychological growth without sorting through the jargon, you're in the right place. This is the Relational Psych Podcast. I'm your host, licensed therapist Tyson Connor. On this show, we learn about the processes and theories behind personal growth and experience a little bit of it ourselves. Join me twice a month for candid conversations about therapy and psychological concepts with real mental health professionals using understandable language and simple experiments that you can try yourself. Keep in mind, this podcast does not constitute therapeutic advice, but we might help you find some. Welcome to the first episode of the Relational Psych Podcast. Listener, I am Tyson Connor. You've already heard my voice. I'm a therapist here at Relational Psych, and my guest for today, our orientation episode, is Dr. Claney.
Yay! Hello.
Dr. Claney is a PhD in clinical psychology and is the founder, owner, and CEO of Relational Psych, aka my boss. Hi, boss.
Hi. I'm happy we're doing this.
Me too. Listener, I'm going to give you a quick peek behind the curtain. We talked for like 40 minutes and none of it recorded. So we are off to a great start with this podcast of just, rolling with it.
Yeah.
Dealing with what shows up. And today what showed up was a corrupted SD card.
But we're learning, and obviously this is our first published one, so we'll be with this.
Right. You're listening to it, so clearly we survived.
Yes.
And part of the goal of this episode is to kind of orient you, listener, to what you can expect from this show. So if this might be the only episode of this podcast you listen to, and that's okay. If you listen to it and you're like, that's not for me, that's fine. And if you're looking at like a long list of episodes and you don't know where to start, hopefully you started here so you can get a sense of like what this show is about, what we're here to do, and what you can expect from each episode. I am a psychotherapist, and I'm also a supervisor here at Relational Psych. And I'll talk about what those things mean in future episodes. I've been in practice, meaning I've graduated and been doing therapy for 7 years at this point. And I'm going to be the host. I'll be here every time. Carly is going to be a regular guest.
Maybe. No, I will. I'll be excited to come back.
And there will be a few other folks who you'll hear repeatedly. Other people who work here at Relational Psych. Some guests will probably ask to come back multiple times. But the goal is for me is to be a consistent presence. So if you're listening to this episode and you're like, man, it's fine listening to Carly. She's fun to listen to, but man, that Tyson guy, his voice is just grating on me. It's not going to get better. Sorry,
No.
This is what it is. So
Goodbye.
again, play it to your cat. Let us climb those ranks. So why don't we start with the origin story? Because, we're therapists and who are interested in development and origins. So Carly, this was your idea, yeah?
It was, yeah.
How did you come up with the idea for this show?
Well, we were in a season of pretty explosive growth a couple months ago. And to back up a little bit, Relational Psych started in March of 2021. And the first year, it was kind of trying to find its feet. And then this past year, 2022, we really, I think, found our feet, growing to now, including myself, 7 full-time employees. And so this was back in September where 3 of the new employees, including yourself, had started. And we were doing some photography and some rebranding and I was writing bios and thinking about what are we doing and how are we doing it and all of that. And I was driving and talking out loud to myself, as you do. And in doing it, I found a different kind of energy than I had when I was just writing some of this out. And it inspired me to think we could probably talk about things in a way that it just hits different than when you read or write about them. And knowing you, we've been friends for a couple years now, and knowing that you'd be excited about this as a little creative endeavor.
Uh-huh.
It felt just really exciting to think, okay, how could we do this? How could we do a podcast that had a couple different goals in mind? Do the marketing and have content for our website and for prospective clients, but also just talk about interesting things in a way that was both deep and approachable.
Right.
That's kind of the vibe we're going for here.
Yeah, and when you first brought up this idea to me, and we were talking very early on about like what this podcast could be and could look like, I'd been having some conversations with some people. I'll even cite him. Hopefully, he'll be a guest on the show in the future. Brian Pendergast, who's a therapist and psychoanalyst in the area, who actually has a deep interest in the idea of like taking out some of the impenetrable, difficult to understand specific language that can get really confusing and can actually be kind of alienating to people. And instead just explaining things in simple language. He has a TikTok account called The Psychoanalyst where he does little sketches and stuff and also talks in plain language about these sorts of things. So he and I had some conversations about this, and then I heard this idea on a different podcast of this aphorism where if you can't explain something in simple language, then you don't understand it. And that idea really caught me. And it came to my mind when you first talked about this podcast, because I think there is definitely a place for special language. You need special language to be able to work with certain complex ideas and to be very specific and to talk about complicated things. And I like this challenge of saying like, look, like psychology is not rocket science, which is to say that psychology is about being a person and how it is to be a person, how we feel and how we think and how we behave. And like everybody does those things. And like we're not talking about like the movement of subatomic particles that we need to wrap our brains around. We're talking about what it feels like to be. And for that, it makes sense to me that like using simple language and making this stuff understandable and approachable would have a value. So I'm excited about doing that here. And so we came up with a mission statement.
We did. Would you read it for us?
I will. All right. Here's the mission statement for this podcast. Listener, if this sounds good to you, then stick around. And if not, play it to your cat so that we can climb up the podcast charts. The Relational Psych podcast makes therapy more approachable by inviting real mental health professionals to explain what they do, why they do it, and why it works, using simple, understandable language that anyone can apply to their lifelong growth. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah. And we wanted to keep it broad enough so that we can evolve, as we will. I'm sure, this should be evolving. And also broad enough that we can talk about like specific therapy things, like how therapy works and different types of therapy. We want to talk about things specific to how we work. So not just all therapy, but specific to psychoanalytic or psychodynamic or relational therapy, all things that we'll define later.
Yep.
And then we also want to give like general mental health information. And then at Relational Psych, again, we'll talk about this later, we also do psychological testing. So we want to be able to explain what that is. And again, as Tyson's saying, like if we want to help people grow, sure, there's concepts and theories that we're going to hold in our mind that we don't need to teach to our clients.
Right.
And if we really want to help this depth growth, this like lifelong, you are changing for the long term, like, yeah, there should be concepts that you're understanding about yourself, that you're able to either consciously or unconsciously like articulate within your experience. So I think it is a good challenge for us to be able to know what we're doing and how to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And part of the hope for this podcast, listener, if you want to subscribe and listen to every episode and you find it all interesting, great. I am here as the host because I find every topic we talk about interesting. So hopefully this is a show I'd want to listen to every episode of. Not just to hear my own voice, but also a little bit of that. But Also, if you're looking through the list and like there are certain topics that stand out to you as really interesting and others that you don't care about, like listen to the ones that you like. Listen to the ones that spark your interest. There's not going to be some like running joke between every episode. There's no
No.
narrative arc. This is meant to be a resource. And if there's an idea or a topic that resonates with you that you want to bring to your own therapist or to your partner or to your dad, like whatever, like if there's an idea that you learn about in therapy and you want to try to talk to your family members about it, maybe you can recommend an episode of this podcast so that they can have a foundational understanding. Our goal isn't to get you to like end one of these 20 to 40 minute episodes and feel like an expert, but rather to feel like you have solid footing in whatever idea or concept that we talked about.
Yeah.
That you don't feel completely over your head or drowning in all of these words that don't make any sense.
Yeah. And that was the idea that you brought to have this experiment each time too,
Right.
which felt like a really helpful way of doing just that. So like, yeah, you learned some stuff, but is there a way to apply it that you'll learn about this later? We don't often assign homework to our clients. Some of us do. I don't know. I don't really care about it.
Me either.
But there is often like this desire to do something with it. So
Right.
what are some of those examples that you might have?
Yeah. So when we talk about the experiment, we want you to be able to have an experience of the thing we talked about. So that can be like practice a specific coping skill, or when you're out in the world, pay attention to how people do behave in these specific contexts. Or go online and take this like 5-minute like questionnaire quiz and look at the results, because that'll be like relevant to what we talked about. Something that you can do to take what we're discussing on the podcast out of the realm of ideas and into the realm of experience.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is a good little microcosm of what we want to do in therapy too. Like
Right.
we want growth to happen, but it doesn't just happen in the room. It really does happen as things are being metabolized in you.
Right.
And I think this experiment is a way of engaging in that metabolizing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an enzyme.
Yeah.
Is that a science thing?
Or like a catalyst.
Sure. Those are words we should define later.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, if we were a biology podcast,
Yeah.
we would, or chemistry, but I don't.
No,
I'm
thank
neither of
you.
those things,
I didn't do
don't,
that.
I don't actually know what the word I just used means. Oopsies. So yes, in terms of structure, this episode will be a little bit different, a little bit shorter than your average episode. We're just kind of getting you up to speed on what to expect moving forward. Every episode, I will be the host. I'll be interviewing someone, either another therapist here who works here at Relational Psych, or an outside expert, another therapist or a psychoanalyst or a psychiatrist, somebody who works in mental health, about some topic. We'll have a conversation back and forth, be kind of like this, a lot of back and forth. I'll be trying to like ask questions and clarify, trying not to use that special language, trying to explain special language when we do find ourselves using it. And then after that, that's when we'll talk about the experiment. That's when we'll go in and say, okay, here's the experiment that you can do. And then finally, we'll include some further learning. Right. And that will be things like, if this is a topic you're really interested in, here's a book you can read. Here's a YouTube video you can watch. Here's another podcast you can listen to, blog you can read, whatever. Something to dive in a little bit deeper. Because again, these conversations will largely be pretty foundational. And if you want to learn deeper, we want to give you those options. We want to give you that springboard. We don't want to have you feel like, oh, that was great, but where now? We want to give you somewhere to go. And listener, this is the first episode that's coming out. So like, this is the structure we're starting with. It could change.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Hopefully if we change it too dramatically, we'll do another like, hey, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Just to reorient you if you're getting lost.
Yes. That feels important.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, we will be back with our first full-length episode. And then we hope to release every 2 weeks after that. We want... At Relational Psych, we're into relationships, so we do want this to be a bit of a dialogue. We don't have a subreddit, and we don't have a Twitter account that I'm aware of yet. Who knows? Maybe we will. But in the meantime, you can always send us an email. If you have a suggestion or a request for a future episode topic, for someone you'd like us to talk to, or really just any feedback about the show, don't hesitate to reach out. We hope that this is a resource that will be useful to you. We hope that it's a little bit fun and a lot bit interesting, and sometimes you might even feel some stuff.
Yeah. We want it to be meaningful. So if this is a good way of spending 20, 30, 40 minutes of your time, love to have you. And if it's not, we really hope that you can use that time in another way. So again, hope we're adding value, and we hope to see you back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you in a fortnight. The Relational Psych podcast is a production of Relational Psych, a mental health clinic providing depth-oriented psychotherapy and psychological testing in person in Seattle and virtually throughout Washington State. If you are interested in psychotherapy or psychological testing for yourself or a family member, links to our contact information are in the show notes. If you are a psychotherapist and would like to be a guest on the show, or are a listener with a suggestion for someone you'd like us to interview, you can contact me at podcast@relationalpsych.group. The Relational Psych podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tyson Connor. Carly Claney is our executive producer, with technical support by Sam Claney and Allie Ray. Our music is by Ben Lewis. We love you, buddy.